Greetings, innovators and leaders. This is AI for the C-Suite, your compass for navigating the exponential age. I'm Chad Harvey, and we're here to bring you cutting-edge insights on AI tailored specifically for middle market organizations. Buckle up as we embark on a journey through the transformative world of artificial intelligence. My guest today is Colleen McKenna, principal of Intero Advisory. As a small business owner, LinkedIn strategist, and trainer, Colleen has leveraged AI for a decade. From LinkedIn to Sales Navigator, Zoom to Calendly and Grammarly, she has woven in AI-based tools to augment how Intero Advisory works and to educate its clients. Since launching Intero Advisory in 2011, Colleen has been a LinkedIn purist. She believes in an authentic approach to building a strategic presence and a professional network that becomes a referral engine. Now, with AI available to all, Colleen continues to be passionate about best practices, including actionable and practical ways to tap into a rapidly changing landscape. Colleen, welcome to AI for the C-Suite.
Great to be here. Always good to spend time with you, Chad.
Indeed. And full disclosure, I have known Colleen for at least a decade, maybe 15 years. And it just makes sense to record the conversation because we have so many good ones in person. So to kick things off, why don't you tell us about your journey into the world of AI and how you've seen it evolve in recent years, and we'll go from there.
Well, I probably had a couple of aha moments over the last year and a half, as many people have. One of my aha moments is, wait a minute, I've actually been using a thing called AI for so much longer than just since January of 2023. And when I started to think about it, I'm thinking, wow, most of us have really been using AI and we just didn't know it. Mm-hmm. So we have always been what I would consider early adopters of some technology. And when I started to think about how we were using certain tools and why we were using certain tools in our business, and then I started to understand, okay, yes, these do employ AI to make me smarter, and I just didn't even realize it. So, December of 2022, I was on a call with a very good friend of mine who actually owned and owns a social media agency. She was really one of the first social media agencies started in New York City, 15 years ago. So really focused on social. And she said to me, have you heard about this thing called AI and DALL-E? And she was showing me over Zoom. And I'm like, wow, this is something else. And I was like, okay, great. And then I talked to her again in January. And she said, did you go anywhere with what we talked about in December? And I was like, no, not really. And then I decided to spend a weekend and I dove in. And I don't know that anything has quite been the same since.
That sounds like the gateway drug I think a lot of us went down is heard about it. Maybe somebody invited us to check something out. We finally looked at it, and it sounds like you were a lot like me. The light bulbs just went off. When I saw AI and the first iteration of ChatGPT at the end of 2022, much like you, it reminded me of when I first saw LinkedIn in the early 2000s. I had the same feeling from when in the early 90s I saw my first web browser and web page with Opera. It was one of those moments when you look at it and you say, nothing's going to be the same after this.
Yeah. So true. This last 18 months, I say to people, it reminds me of when I started Intero Advisory in 2011. And people would say to me, can you explain this thing called LinkedIn and why does it matter? And I don't like social media. And all of these questions and all of these feelings and thoughts would bubble up in conversation. And the ongoing changes that, and in this case, so many changes so quickly, it's almost impossible to keep up at this point. So I do feel like I'm reliving 2011 a little bit. So I totally identify with what you're saying.
Yeah,
Wow.
it is. it's impossible to keep up if you're trying to keep up with everything. I think if you narrow your focus, and you and I just had some back and forth on LinkedIn of all platforms, and we're going to talk about LinkedIn here momentarily, the other day. If you narrow your focus, I think you can stay abreast of it. I don't know if you can ever truly keep up. As a technologist I know said to me about a year and a half ago, he said, even the people that are building this stuff doesn't know what it's capable of.
Yeah, exactly. And, I do have some North Stars. You're
Yeah.
among them, right? You have to have a guide along this journey. It's just too complicated otherwise. And very similar. Everybody's saying the same thing. Find your thread and follow that thread, right? Pull that on that thread, because otherwise you're so diluted and it just becomes this like amorphous hot mess. It's just too much to manage. So I do think simplifying it as much as possible and knowing where you want to start is really, really crucial.
Yeah.
Really crucial.
I agree. And speaking of thread pulling, let's pull on your thread for a minute. Your in-house expertise is LinkedIn, of course. Mm-hmm. And I'd love to know, what kind of questions are you getting right now from the middle market companies that you work with? What are the leaders asking you about AI? Let's just start very general. What are you getting from them right now in terms of inquiry?
How can we start using it? Mm-hmm. Why should we start using it? Most of our clients are really focused on AI related to content right now, because that does seem to be an easier place. And there's been so much conversation about that. And so clients are saying, oh, now we finally have an easier way to ideate content. So many of our clients struggled with the content piece for so long. So now I'm like, what's a topic? And I might take that topic and I have the paid version of all of the tools that we use. And in fact, with ChatGPT, I have the team version. And I might go in and I might say, what would this audience be interested in? And so then I could say to our clients, here's one use case. Here's one way that we could help you really go further faster, because you've really struggled in this area. So I do see that as a great way for many of our clients to just begin to get their feet, and put their feet in the water and get comfortable. And again, we are not using AI to create that content and just plop it into LinkedIn or wherever, right? Mm-hmm. It gets edited. A subject matter person has to look at it. I mean, there are, it's personalized. So we're not just picking it up and saying, here you go. But we are talking to clients about using it in that way. And people are open to that because it has been an area that's been frustrating for them for a while.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting when we talk about content and content creation. That's often the first approach point that folks speak to me about too. I'll walk into a CEO's executive office and they're very pleased to tell me that I just wrote a blog post using ChatGPT. It's like, okay, great. We've got that out of the way, right? We've got some basic usability here. We understand how it works. Now, how are you going to drive value for your organization? And I would imagine that the content conversations that you have with folks about what they're doing on LinkedIn, again, that's just kind of the starting point, because you don't want to use these tools just to create very static content, or not static's not the right word, but content that's going to be homogenized, quite frankly.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. And really where I'm really excited about having conversations, and we've been doing this work for probably close to a year now, is actually on the network side. So looking at people's network and using AI or business intelligence, because we use one platform that's strictly for data, and helping them understand who's in their network and getting a report back on, hey, these are the people you're connected to. Is that strategically aligned with your business objectives for even using LinkedIn, right? Mm-hmm. So the content's one piece, but analyzing and understanding networks is really, really interesting. And it pulls things out that people can't see when they think about their network, or even when they download their network from LinkedIn and look at it in a spreadsheet, which we have done together in the past. It's really, really interesting.
Yeah.
Really, that's fun.
Yeah, that is interesting, and I'm very excited to see where some of the data analysis, but also the data visualization tools go over the
Yeah.
next, I'd say year, but maybe even just 3 to 4 months. Because if you've played it all with the new Claude, and full disclosure, we're recording this episode the end of June, so we're about a week in from the 3.5 Sonnet release with Artifact. The data visualization capabilities of that are orders of magnitude more capable than GPT 4.0 was just 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I have not. I just saw that I have it just the other day, right? So I haven't gone in, but I'm going to take my network and then visualize it
Mm-hmm.
and see what we get, because I do have like a framework for that in terms of visualizations and a series of prompts. So I definitely want to test that because I love Claude. And you were the person that actually introduced me to
Oh.
Claude. And I was like, okay, so let me and I love, see, each of them are a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
I love Gemini because it's a little punchier in terms of style of content.
Mm-hmm.
I think Claude's a little bit more sophisticated in its style. So they each are nuanced in very interesting ways to me.
They really are, and I'm finally starting to see middle market organizations begin to move beyond just the off the shelf LLMs and start to using, whether it's Azure Studio or some of the others, start to program their own LLMs, and it's a lot more cost effective now than it was even a year ago, which it's going to be very interesting to see where all this goes. But getting back to the data visualization piece, what you just mentioned in your intent there with your LinkedIn network to visualize that would be a very interesting exercise, especially for somebody like you that has how many connections and followers?
Yeah. I, for someone who does the work I do, I probably have a very small network, but it's probably, I don't know, 8 or 9,000, 10,000 maybe.
just a wee little network, yes.
Just a wee little network. However, truly, compared to those who do similar work to me, who, 20,000, 30,000, but that was never my intent to have the
Mm-hmm.
largest network, right? And if you really, anybody can build the largest network, but it's about having a network that works for you for your business. And I find it really fascinating what I can pull out, and because I can just basically chat with the data, right? So I can say, show me who I'm connected to in companies in this area, right? Or what are the top 10 titles by position within my network? And a lot of times for salespeople, their networks are not as dialed in as they might need to be, especially if they're really want to be intentional about using LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
So this kind of insight really helps create a roadmap for them where they can be much more dialed in about how they're using the platform.
So I try very hard not to get too far out over my skis, as they say, because the landscape is changing so rapidly. You just said something, though, that is very interesting to me, and it leads into a personal opinion of mine. One of my opinions is that a lot of the current enterprise level software, especially software focused on sales, is either going to go away or change significantly over the next 5 years. And I'd be very interested in your thoughts on how, since you talked about sales folks a moment ago, how the sales department and the sales initiatives within organizations might be able to start to better leverage some of the tools a la LinkedIn and the generative AI capabilities that are out there. Whether you've got a Frankenstein monster together some stuff and export data, or whether you think LinkedIn is going to embed some different tools, what's that look like for sales folks over the next couple of years, do you think?
So again, I like to be careful about not getting too far out of my feed. However, if people are using LinkedIn Sales Navigator and they have it connected, with their CRM, Salesforce, HubSpot, and HubSpot just really, LinkedIn and HubSpot just did that integration earlier this year. I think more of that data is going to be able to flow bidirectionally much more easily. And I think that that's going to be important for salespeople to work from one space.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was actually just listening to something the other day, and they were saying, in marketing and so therefore in sales, over the next few years, a lot of these platforms are really going to just merge together. so that LinkedIn's going to be feeding that CRM. So it's important to have a CRM because otherwise you don't have anything to feed it to.
Right.
And we're going to be able to chat with our data in very, very different ways. We're going to be able to segment in very, very different ways. So I do think that there's going to be, I mean, in all of these platforms on the sales side, they all have an AI roadmap now. In fact, HubSpot, I think not too long ago, released like their whole AI roadmap. So they're really creating a lot of transparency around that, which I think is really, really helpful for people, because for a large enterprise organization to plan their sales, like tech stack and marketing stack over the next few months or a couple of years, is going to be really, really challenging.
Yes,
really challenging. But LinkedIn first party data really can be helpful to those CRMs that are really just filled with third party data, right?
Yeah.
So I think that LinkedIn, there's two parts of LinkedIn. Their data is amazing in terms of what they know about members and all of the information as a salesperson we can get from the data within LinkedIn. And then there's the side of LinkedIn that's really starting to showcase AI so that you can build your LinkedIn profile and do more with content. And I'm really a little bit apprehensive at this point, June 2024, because I don't think that piece is really very strong at this moment. In fact, just earlier today, I demonstrated that within LinkedIn, and people were like, "Oh, that's not very good." I was like, so the data part, they've really got wrapped up pretty well, but the AI to build your profile and create instant contact and engagement, with other people's posts, I think there's maybe the next iteration.
Yeah. I think that's fair. And what I often tell people is if you don't like the way the tool's performing, just wait a quarter, right? And you're going to come back and it's going to be very different. I really like the way you framed your response to my question, though, because you talked about the data and then you talked about the use of the generative AI layered on top of the data. And the data piece, I think you're absolutely right to call LinkedIn out on how strong its data is, because it's got very good structure. It's got very good observational analytics on the back end in terms of watching what people are doing there. Not to sound too spooky, but look, that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
And if people are engaging with the platform on a regular basis, the data that's self-provided is relatively good. So getting a good set of data is almost more valuable these days than the actual generative AI product, because you can just license one of these tools from somebody and throw it in.
Right, exactly. And, it's interesting. I was reading something the other day about all of this generative AI is going to be combined into whether it's, Google Workspace or Microsoft, right, Copilot. And we want to get to the data, but in order for the data actually has to be good and relevant and up to date in order for it to be useful on the output side, right? And that's important on the data side. It's important on the prompting side, what you actually put in as an input to make sure that what you're receiving is what you want. Because I think sometimes people will say, "Oh, I tried it. I put in a couple of prompts and it was like superfluous," right? It was like, well, again, augmentation, think about that in turn as everybody's talking about. You might have to have more of a conversation than just say, than two declarative statements. So how we put in the information is really, really important. And I think it's probably a skill. That's one of the things I hear. They're like, "I actually don't know how to talk to it." And so we'll do a live session. And they're like, "That's how you talk to it?" I'm like, "Yeah, pretty much."
That's spot on what you just mentioned, because I think that's where a lot of folks are getting tripped up, especially, and I'm going to sound ageist here, but a lot of folks above the age of 50 that are used to computer programming, right? Especially if they had a course in college way back when. This is not computer programming. It's a conversation.
It's a conversation. And I mean this in the very nicest of ways. we do a lot of profile development for a lot of CEOs, and they'll often say to us, "Oh, you have so much information there. Can't we just do like a sentence or two and 3 bullet points, right? That high D, that CEO who's got that high D personality, like, they want to get right to it."
Right.
And that doesn't necessarily create the best output, right? So
Right.
if they approach it that way with, okay, I'm saying 2 sentences and I'm going to give you 3 bullet points, may not quite be enough. So we have to, I'm like, step back and think about that really as a conversation. Um, I might have, I don't know, 8 or 9 different prompts that I put in sometimes to get where I'm going. And one of the tips that I was given a while ago, and it actually really does make a difference, is say, hey, you know what? That was a great start. Improve it. How would you improve it, right? Because on that second and third iteration, it does get better, right?
Mm-hmm.
It wants to please you and it wants to get better.
Yeah.
So I do think that there needs to be this phase of intentional experimentation. I don't like the phrase "let's play with it" or "go play with it," because we need to be more intentional about it,
Mm-hmm.
and study it and think about, okay, I just said this. This is what I got. What else could I say? What else does it need to know?
Mm-hmm.
So just be a little bit more curious, really.
It really does come down to that. And it can't be a top down initiative, especially one that's driven by the IT department. I walk into organizations all the time anymore, and I'll get a call, I'll come in, and they'll say some version of, "We've been stuck for the last 4 months, the last 6 months, the last 8 months." I said, "Well, what have you done?" "Well, our AI committee, dot, dot, dot," right? And that's where good ideas go to die, is in this phase, because it is moving so rapidly and because the changes are happening so quickly. There's not an ability to drive this down like a full-blown IT implementation, say like if you were going to be putting a new ERP in, right?
Right, right.
So it's at
Yeah,
play.
yeah. And I think, people are now kind of getting the concept of, okay, a job is a series of tasks, right? What are those tasks? Which ones have high value? Which ones can be enhanced with using AI? Kind of really breaking it down.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that's why it goes back to, I think I used Calendly within the first 6 months of, right, however long ago that was, or Zoom, because I'm a small business person. I can't be scheduling appointments all day, right? Like, and that's just such a minor example. I always encourage them, use some of these things in ways, and they're like, well, that's not AI. Actually, it's working on your behalf. So that kind of automation where it takes away those repetitive tasks,
Mm-hmm.
it makes you better at what you do, right?
Right.
It just helps you. It just takes things out of the way. So I do think it's important for people to look at their role and think, okay, what are the things I do in the course of a day?
Mm-hmm.
And then even ask
Right.
whatever, whichever platform you're using, how would you, these are the things I do. How can you help me?
Exactly. And one of the biggest, I mentioned one big mistake I see a lot. Another big mistake is we're going to survey these 12 departments in our organization, and we're going to ask them, how can we use generative AI? Well, if you haven't laid a groundwork for, what did you call it, intelligent or intentional experimentation, you're not going to get good answers, because the abilities of these systems, people don't, unless they play with them, truly understand what the capabilities are.
Yeah, it goes back to really good communication.
Right.
First, that's culture, right?
Yeah.
Culture and communicating, and educating and training your people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And your teams. I just finished a session where it was a leadership team, about 30 people from a pretty large organization. We want to be the best, and in order to be the best, we need to speak into you. We need to give you professional development opportunities. We need you to understand how different platforms work, so you can think about how it can help you in your job, right? And then we talked about LinkedIn, but it's the same for AI. And the same thing, I see a lot of what happened over the years with LinkedIn, people just figured it out or they didn't. And guess what? A lot of times most people didn't figure it out.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
They just didn't. And for whatever reason, and there's lots of them, corporately, they just didn't think it was important.
Mm-hmm. I think that's going to be a real deadly mistake. It wasn't necessarily deadly when LinkedIn came along.
Mm-hmm.
It was deadly when the internet arrived, and companies that didn't adapt died very, very quickly. It's going to be even more acute going forward. And you talked about, you didn't use the word project flow, but the project flow and the way that people work, I think is a great starting point for that conversation. Another starting point that I found recently is exactly what you and I are doing here. We're having a conversation and we're recording this conversation. One of the things that knowledge workers I've found can do is record your client interactions with their permission, of course, and record the meetings that you're having. And even if you're not able to immediately start to leverage that, bank that information. If you've got 10 or 20 or 120 hours of meeting recordings, or if you're working on a project, that is invaluable, absolutely invaluable.
So we've always done it through Zoom, and then we, used a couple of other tools. We now use a tool called Grain. I love Grain. And Grain will even say, "Oh, you were talking a lot today, Colleen, on that call," right? I'm like, and then I validate. I'm like, well, that was a training session, right? Mm-hmm. So it gives you so much insight. But I take those transcripts and first of all, I just send it right along to the client. Like, here's our highlights. But I mean, I probably have 150 of them. So to your point, I'll download those transcripts and I'll say, can you put together the top 40 micro-learning segments, right? And then I have them. And then number one, I have a new piece of content that I can share with anybody, right?
Right.
But it's another piece that I can then really share with that particular client. Also, for others on our team, I can say, you know what? Here's what we need to be focused on, right? So we want to be talking about the same way all the time. So if you have a team where you're bringing in new salespeople, for example, having that kind of institutional information is really important. It's like creating a training playbook.
Mm-hmm. The issue of training is of particular interest to me, and training with respect to LinkedIn in the age of AI is extremely interesting to me because I think we're going to see an explosion of information out there that's AI generated or AI Copilot generated. And I don't mean by Microsoft Copilot, I mean with a human, writing alongside it. And the validity of that information, the quality of that information, I think is going to be immediately suspect. LinkedIn is they should be paying us for this conversation. LinkedIn is a trusted platform, yes. But it really is. It's been around long enough. It's trusted. You know, for the most part, whom you're dealing with, other than the barrage of bot email cold connections that we all get anymore. So with all that said, how do you envision AI transforming the role of professional development and training and lifelong learning over the next couple of years?
Yeah, well, there's a kind of a lot around that topic. Yeah. LinkedIn Learning will continue to be a really strong platform and really should be used by more organizations because it is very exceptional. I mean, they have done a really great job with that. I want to kind of go back. I think that one of the things that I'm talking about right now, because of AI, I think the presence that you build on LinkedIn is more important than ever. And because we can verify our profile now, which everybody should be verifying our profiles so that people know that you are a real human. As you're connecting with people, I'm leaning more toward, hey, have they verified their profile? Because you don't want to be connecting with, fake profiles because that's definitely a thing. And I think it's this ongoing piece that, Reid Hoffman, who was the co-founder of LinkedIn, said, everybody's in permanent beta. And you have to realize that you're in permanent beta. And that is going to be for like Gen Z and every, and Gen X and everybody, you've got to just be constantly learning and building your personal brand, thinking about potentially becoming, not, when I say this, I don't mean like like how it is on Instagram, but as an influencer, but being a content creator, you just have to get comfortable in these roles where you're building out your professional presence for your career.
Mm-hmm.
And the disadvantage right now to companies is that the individual, so the employee is at the advantage, right? So if it's not going to come from the company supporting that endeavor, employees are just going to do it on their own.
Yeah.
If they
And
want a long-standing career, in my opinion.
that's exactly right. Well, and you and I have both been around and played with LinkedIn long enough to remember when companies would ban you from having a profile on LinkedIn because they didn't want their employees visible, right? And that has been an interesting change that it took about 5 years for that tide to kind of ebb and flow there. But I think the point that you made there is well taken. So,
yeah, I think that leaders just need to get finally way more comfortable.
yeah,
They, none of this is a fad, right? And I have worked long enough that in the late 1900s, I was at a major newspaper, working at a major newspaper, and I stood in a room when the publisher said this thing called the internet is a fad.
mm-hmm.
And we all know how it's turned out for most, daily newspapers, not well. So it really does need to be taken seriously. And again, they need a guide so that they can make better informed and intelligent decisions with not just their own perspective and personal bias. And there are lots of CEOs and leaders doing that. We just need more of them, right? Because, there has to be more that kind of say, okay, we have to take the time and learn this. Not figure it out, but learn this, engage.
Yeah. I think that's a really good way of framing that. And the only additional underscoring I would do on that is that the timeline that the leaders have to adapt and make those changes and lean into this, it is much more abbreviated than most people realize. And that's I'm not saying that in an alarmist fashion. That is what happens when general purpose technologies like this one come along and all the underlying infrastructure is already there that enables them to scale. So.
Yeah, I mean, it is not third quarter, right?
No.
It's take a couple of days, close everything off, right? And just dive in.
Yeah.
And I do believe, and I do hear this a lot, AI committees and AI councils, but nothing's getting done. So you do need to have a champion who is actually in either Strengths Finders or PI or something, is a doer.
Yeah.
So that, because until you can get some successes, everybody's kind of just, I don't know, what do you think? I don't know. But if you can get some early successes and see progress and see how it's making a difference, then everybody typically joins the parade within the company.
I think that that's spot on. The other thing that I've seen happen is that once you get some interesting use cases within an organization and people's eyes start to open up to say, oh, we don't need to print this out and then scan this and then data entry this over here. Now, in some ways, that's very basic business process, change management, digitization. But in other ways, this is an opportunity for organizations to leapfrog past some of the things that they probably should have done 10 or 12 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is still surprising to me when I talk to people, and this is a mid-sized company and they don't have a CRM or, there's just some major foundational pieces. What's your sales process? Really don't have one that don't exist. So this is also a really good time to look at all of those foundational pieces. What is in place? And maybe the selection of what you make is going to be influenced now by where we are. It might be very different than today, what I choose, than what I chose a year and a half ago. And the other thing that we do, and I find this very helpful, and I find that a lot of our clients don't do this often enough, is pretty much monthly, we look at all of our digital tools. Mm-hmm. Are we actually using them? Is there something else that we should be using because now they do this and that, right? And there's a lot of overlap among these tools now, especially if you either, are kind of a Microsoft shop or a Google shop, right? There's a lot of overlap. What do you need? What tools do you need to be using?
Yeah.
And that's a great place to start too.
I love that. And that may be one of the notes that we end on here with respect to tools. And I'd love your take on this before we wrap things up. One of the things that I'm finding is people are very proud that they're using this tool or that tool. Maybe it's a tool they've used for a while. Maybe it's a tool that they've just started using recently, yet they haven't compared these tools to other tools that are out there. I see this an awful lot, and I'm going to pick on Zoom. Zoom now has its automatic recording and transcription and meeting summary features in there. And you know what? Sorry, Zoom. It's okay. Mm-hmm. It's not great. But a lot of people, that's their entry point. So how often do you find when you work with organizations that they are using maybe these outdated tools or tools that are not quite at the level that they should be?
Oh, very often. Yeah. Very often. And I think sometimes, especially the larger the organization, like who's managing this selection of tools, right? And sometimes people just get really comfortable and changing from one set to another. It's hard. It is hard. But I like to always be kind of forward thinking about, okay, this is our set today. It does not mean that we will be using this 6 months from now. And so for even on the LinkedIn side, which I'm quite confident we will be using 6 months from now, right? I don't recommend annual subscriptions for Premium or Sales Navigator because you can't get out of them. And there was a situation early 2023 where we were like, oh my gosh, we have to have this particular AI tool, and it only offered it's a brand voice if we bought this very expensive level, right? And they were like, this will only be at this level. Well, all of these tools are changing their feature sets too, right? And their pricing plans. And so about 3 months later, I discovered that suddenly this was in a much, this brand voice was in a much lower version and really much more in line with us. I chose to purchase it because we wanted this one feature. It was very expensive. And now it's, available at like 1/10 of the cost. And they did the right thing, which was fabulous. The company did the right thing. And we were able to switch. But there's probably only a short period of time where they're going to, kind of manage it that way. All of their subscription models, I just have really noticed are very volatile.
Yeah.
And they're trying to figure it out because they don't maybe even know what their business model is yet, right? So my recommendation to clients is just go month by month. Yes, you're going to pay a little bit more, but you're going to have way more flexibility.
I think that's a really solid recommendation, especially since we are still in the very early phases of the development of these, and we don't have a whole lot of integrated solutions yet.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And many of these companies most likely won't be around in 5 or 6 years.
Ding, ding, ding.
Unfortunately, it'll merge or they'll be bought or something. But so you do need to be a little bit careful with your selection.
Yeah. I think that is a good statement, and I can piggyback, having spent multiple sessions with you over the years. I know one of the best practices that you recommend is regularly exporting and downloading your LinkedIn data so that you've got that. Not that we think LinkedIn's going anywhere tomorrow or the next week, but still.
No, in fact, I've had 3 conversations in the last probably 6 weeks where people have called me because they've either been shut down temporarily because they've had multiple people logging into their LinkedIn profile, or changed companies and something got glitchy on the back end, and they don't have their network. They don't have their data.
Yeah.
And sometimes they can work through that with LinkedIn, sometimes they can't. So.
I said that was going to be the last question, but you just said something else that I think is important for us to talk about real briefly before we wrap this up. I actually just posted about this in the AI for the C-Suite platform. There's a new peer-reviewed study out last week that examines AI large language models and their ability to engage in spear phishing. And spear phishing in the past has traditionally been relegated toward high-value targets, right? CEOs of large enterprise-level organizations, high-net-worth individuals, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. What this study found is that using these AI LLMs, you can significantly drive the cost down of spear phishing to the point that it's comparable with the more traditional, just kind of blasted out spray and pray type of man-in-the-middle attacks and spamming. And so I think that we are going to see a rise in the amount of folks that have their accounts compromised over the next year due to the democratization of these tools. So to your point about leaders having had their accounts compromised, I think that is something that we can expect a lot more of. And I don't know that any platform, LinkedIn included, has really good protocols in place to assist you with that right now. Maybe I'm wrong and you know something I don't.
No, I actually think you're right. And I think that's why, it's more important to be there and build that presence, but it's equally, if not more important, to be a really smart member, right? And be careful who you connect with and review your network and understand who you're engaging with. And is your network open or is it closed? You kind of have to put your hood on, if you will, a little bit and be a little bit careful. I'm an optimist. However, I don't randomly connect, right? Yeah. It's just not my thing. I don't believe in it. And especially for leaders and CEOs, your identity, your reputation is critical. It's critical to your brand, to who you are as a person. And so we will need to be more discerning about how we engage on these platforms for sure.
Mm-hmm. And if I was ever going to print up a bumper sticker for you, it would say, I don't randomly connect.
I don't.
Colleen, I really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. For the listeners that might want to learn more about you or your work or get in touch, what is the best way for them to accomplish that?
So I would head over to LinkedIn. So LinkedIn, Colleen McKenna, Intero Advisory. Send me a connection request. Saw you with Chad, and then we can connect, right? That's the easiest place. Our website's interoadvisory.com, INTERO advisory.com. Those are the two best places.
All right. Well, I look forward to seeing you around LinkedIn, and I really appreciate your time today, Colleen.
Thanks. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Thank you, everyone, for tuning into AI for the C-Suite, where we are committed to helping middle market leaders thrive during the exponential age. If you found value in today's discussion, please be sure to subscribe to our podcast, follow us on all the socials, especially LinkedIn, and visit our site, aiforthec-suite.com. Join us next time as we unlock the potential of AI for your organization. And until then, keep your algorithms running, your leadership evolving, and your AI in check. Bye.